Have you ever heard of a soldier who refused to surrender for 30 years? World War II ends in 1945. The world moves on. People rebuild. Families reunite. But deep in the dense, humid jungles of the Philippines, one man refuses to believe any of it. For him, the war is still raging. The enemy is still lurking. And his mission, to fight no matter what. This is the unbelievable, yet true story of Hiroo Onoda, the Japanese soldier who stayed in the jungle for 3 decades, waiting for an order that had long since been forgotten. Hiroo Onoda was born on March 19, 1922 in Kamikawa, Japan. He grew up like any other boy in the countryside, running through fields, playing with his siblings, and dreaming of the future. But his future was not what he expected. At 18, he was drafted into the Imperial Japanese Army. Unlike regular infantry, Onoda was trained for something special. He was sent to the elite Nakano school, where soldiers learned guerrilla warfare, intelligence tactics, and survival skills. He wasn't just a soldier, he was a strategist, a ghost in the jungle, an invisible force of war. Then, in December 1944, he was deployed to Lubang Island in the Philippines. His orders were simple, yet absolute. 1. Do not surrender. 2. Do not take your own life. 3. Continue fighting until your commanding officer returns. These words would define the rest of his life. When American and Filipino forces landed on Lubang Island in 1945, the Japanese forces were crushed. Many died. Some surrendered. But Onoda and 3 others refused. They vanished into the jungle, waiting for reinforcements that would never come. In August 1945, the war officially ended. Japan surrendered, but no one told Onoda. At first, he and his men expected their army to return. Days turned into weeks, then months, then years. Leaflets were dropped into the jungle announcing Japan's surrender, but Onoda dismissed them as enemy propaganda. Onoda, a trick, he told his men. Onoda, the war is still on. Even when they found newspapers, even when they saw civilians returning to normal life, they believed it was all a setup. Their mission was to disrupt enemy activity, and that's what they did. Stealing food, sabotaging crops, and occasionally clashing with local police. For 30 years, Onoda lived off bananas, coconuts, and stolen rice. He repaired his tattered uniform with vines and bark. His rifle, a World War II-era Arisaka, remained his most trusted companion. The jungle became his home, his battlefield, his prison. In 1950, one of his men, Yuichi Akatsu, had enough. He surrendered to the Philippine authorities. Onoda and the remaining 2 soldiers called him a traitor. Then, in 1954, Corporal Shoichi Shimada was killed in a firefight with Filipino soldiers. Now, it was just Onoda and Kenchichi Kozuka. For 18 more years, they stayed hidden. They ignored rescue attempts, shot at search parties, and rejected every sign that the war was over. Then, in 1972, Kozuka was killed in another skirmish. Onoda was now alone. In 1974, a young Japanese adventurer named Norio Suzuki set out on a mission: 1. Find Hiroo Onoda. 2. Find a panda. 3. Find the abominable snowman. Yes, this was a real list. And shockingly, he found Onoda first. Suzuki trekked through the jungle, calling out, "Suzuki, Onoda-san, the war is over. Come home." And for the first time in decades, Onoda didn't shoot. He listened. But he refused to believe it. "Onoda, I will only surrender if my commanding officer orders me to." Suzuki returned to Japan and miraculously found Onoda's old superior, Major Yoshimi Taniguchi, who had long since retired and become a bookseller. In March 1974, Taniguchi flew to Lubang Island and delivered the words Onoda had been waiting to hear for 30 years. "Lieutenant, the war is over. You are relieved of your duty." Onoda saluted, handed over his sword, rifle, and ammunition, and finally walked out of the jungle. Onoda returned to Japan as a national hero. The world was fascinated by his story, but he was a man out of time. His country had changed beyond recognition. He couldn't understand the modern way of life. He struggled to adjust. So, he left. He moved to Brazil, where he became a cattle farmer. Years later, he returned to Japan and opened a survival school for troubled youth. He taught them resilience, discipline, and how to survive in the wild. Hiroo Onoda passed away in 2014 at the age of 91. Hiroo Onoda's story is one of extreme loyalty, perseverance, and, some would argue, blind stubbornness. One thing is for sure, Hiroo Onoda wasn't just a soldier. He was the last warrior of World War II, the ghost of an era long gone, a legend who defied time itself. So, what do you think about Onoda's story? Was he a hero, a tragic figure, or simply a man lost in his own convictions? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing historical stories.